Welcome to the WorldWild Podcast. I'm Miles Irving, and this podcast with Irene Lyon from the States is number 4 of a series, which is loosely based around the polyvagal theory, but at any rate is exploring the nervous system, and also elaborating on the theme which I always kind of come back to, that of home, and a threefold idea which works very nicely with how our nervous system kind of grounds, is the basis for our experience, really, that we connect and can be at home in our environment, in our ecosystem, and in our relationships in the interpersonal sphere, and we could also find ourselves at home in the body. So Irene's work is all about helping people to reconnect with their body, to learn to listen to their body, as a sort of route, as a method and a way for healing, and whether that's healing of physical ailments or emotional or psychological problems, that's the kind of the way that she's working, but very much within the same framework of understanding and working with the nervous system, and that's in the context of this great wealth of research and information that's come out in the last 30 or 40 years that's really shining a light on that. I just wanted to say a couple of things that have come to mind and sort of reflecting on the conversation, and just as a way to sort of set the stage. So one thing is, and it's a theme that keeps coming up, the idea of making the unseen seen, and looking at the idea that underground, plants and plants have a root system, and other organisms are under there with a very complex system that's never seen. And yet, of course, what becomes visible is what's above ground. So I think it's very useful and helpful to think about the fact that we have an unseen realm, which is working in a realm, obviously, that's, you could say, metaphorically is underground and obviously is unseen. But then the visible parts of our life crop up, and you could say that they're above ground. So the things that we say and make explicit, sort of verbally, perhaps, and then our actions and our projects and procedures, you could say, are those visible parts. And I've just been thinking about the fact that it's summer and now the flowers are out. I mean, some things have finished flowering or in seed, but there's still a lot of things that are in flower. I needed to get out and get some wood sorrel yesterday. It's a lovely little leaf, looks a bit like clover, so it's trifoliate with 3 little leaflets. But the way you tell it from clover is that the leaflets have a heart shape rather than being like a tear shape that's almost properly round. They have quite a distinct little bit that goes in at the top, like a heart. Anyway, I had to get some in a hurry, so I couldn't drive out to some of our better patches. I know there's some smaller amounts nearby, but unfortunately they had sort of crept back into the forest from the path. So where I normally could see them from the edge of the path and then just follow them into the forest, I had to actually go right into the forest and go all the way up and down near the path in order to discover this patch of wood sorrel, which was still there, and then I got what I needed. But the point that I want to make is that if I'd have been doing this just a few weeks ago, in April or early May, wood sorrel is in flower. And I have discovered several patches of really, really nice patches of wood sorrel in the woods because it's in flower, because those little whitish, white, they're white flowers with little lilac stripes, but they're highly visible. And of course, that's the whole point for a flower and for a plant, not to attract humans to come and eat the leaves. That's a bit of a sort of occupational hazard for plants in putting flowers up, that they might attract the attentions of herbivores. But actually, the point of putting those flowers up is to attract the bees and other pollinators to come and suck the nectar and help to transfer the pollen. So this is a way of becoming deliberately highly visible and attracting attention. And of course, you could take that further, because flowers often put out delicious aromas which have the same effect of attracting the attention of pollinators. Actually, as an aside, to they sometimes put out rather unpleasant aromas to us, but for things like flies, which are attracted to the smell of rotten meat and feces, that some of these plants put out aromas more like that. But either way, these above ground parts are deliberately attracting attention. And if you think about it, when we attract attention, we are also attracting or inviting engagement, interaction, and relation. So there's this beautiful dance between bees and flowers, obviously, where the pollinators are coming, they're getting pollen stuck to their leg, they're moving to another flower, and they're actually making the reproductive work of the plant be accomplished, so that there's pollination and the seed and the fruit is then formed. But that's really the thought I wanted to bring out, that the above ground parts of our life, the visible parts, are there to allow this engagement. But that when we have a root system that's not fully functional, that probably explains a lot in terms of why the visible parts of our life, our activities and our relationships to everything else, are not working quite right. So I suppose where I want to go with that is just to draw out yet again that there is all this work to be done around making the unseen seen, because when we are conscious of our roots, when we are conscious, and in this case we'll be talking about our felt experience, like in this especially this particular podcast, where we're exploring what it means to be in touch with the signals our body's giving us, both about our internal world and the signals our body's giving us about the external world. Once we understand those roots and work with those roots, then all of a sudden it becomes much more functional, that we're able to relate in the more visible realm of our actual contact with other people, with our surroundings and all the other species and everything that comes with that. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And then the other thing I want to say is just related to trauma, because obviously in trying to disentangle problems within the body, the topic of this conversation today comes back to the fact that the misalignment of ourselves with our environment is both the result of and the cause of a lot of trauma. And so we have all of this stuff that we're walking around with, which means that we can't relate properly because we can't have the right kind of contact with people, our surroundings, and our own body. But the point is, where does trauma come from? And that you could discuss and reel off a long list of different things that could result in trauma. But I wanted to just discuss the fact that there's an idea going around that there's like trauma going back 7 generations, which has an effect on people living in the current generation, that things that's happened in the past are being carried. And that could be something that relates to a lot of communities around the world that have been affected by the invasion of European people in the past few hundred years. And that's something that is a whole issue around how do we recover, and how do we especially we in countries such as United Kingdom, or people living in North America, this stuff is right before you all the time. How do we undo the effects of that trauma? Both those of us who are part of a race such as I am, where my ancestors have been involved in a great deal of this stuff, but also recognizing that wherever you are, you are on the receiving end of trauma. So the colonizers that went out, it must be true that what they did, which was so unbelievably insensitive and cruel and arrogant and greedy and selfish and all these things, but like that very position to go out and behave in that way has to be the effects of trauma, and the effects of a lack of early experience, which enabled people to become responsive and sensitive and empathic. And then bringing it a bit more up to date in terms of those of us in countries that were involved in the last two world wars. There's certainly 7 generations between now and the Second World War, and many more generations between now and the First World War. So those of us in those kind of countries have probably had grandparents and great grandparents who were killed in both of those wars. So we are all the walking wounded, and so we really do need this message about the nervous system and trauma. But most of all, or at least very much, I think we need a message that says that the earth and the land is a big part of the healing of the trauma. And I think there's perhaps a whole sort of second wave or another wave that needs to come through all of the thinking about healing trauma and the body that involves much more of an emphasis on connection to land, wild spaces, and other species. So I just wanted to sort of finish this off by revisiting again the story about the antelope that runs away from a cheetah and manages to escape. So what does it do? So that antelope's just escaped. The cheetah's now nowhere to be seen. And what it does is it begins to shake. And basically all of that tension of being chased and being in fear for its life comes out of the body. And the antelope then walks back to the herd, and it finds solace in the proximity, the closeness of the other members of the herd. So the body has done something. It's reconnected to the body by shaking, and then it reconnects to the herd and co-regulates. So another level of reconnecting to the body and just feeling safe and social again. But thirdly, it begins to graze. It just starts grazing. And that act of eating and chewing, it's a response and a connection to the landscape, that sense of being nurtured by the landscape, and also the relationship to the plant, the familiar smells, the familiar texture of the grass or whatever it is it's eating, and then swallowing and feeling the compounds within the grass as it digests, becoming part of the body. This is a third layer of reconnecting to the body by connecting to something. So connecting to the body, others in your species, and then to others in the sense of the land and grass and so on in that particular example. But obviously it points to, for me, the real importance and the part that it plays in this whole picture, importance of foraging. So when we go out and gather plants, this is part of what we're doing. This is part of healing the wounds of trauma, that we come back again to a landscape, to a Mother Earth, if you like, to the nurturing and the sustenance that's provided by all of the vigorous, that vitality of the plant growth around us, which many times I've referred to, that things like nettles and dandelions and the weeds that grow in the grass in the lawn, either in your garden or in a park or a green space near where you live. The land is actually providing sustenance and nurturance to you. And that when we gather these things, it is profoundly soothing, and it brings a sense of connection and belonging, that you are an active member of the whole sort of species profile of the place that you live. You're not just passing through it, but you're stopping and gathering, entering into the life cycles of these plants by actually responding to their availability at different stages in their life cycle, whether that's gathering the flowers or the leaves or the seeds or whatever. And then you take those home and you sort of massage them into your lived experience. Just by cooking a recipe, they become part of your memory. They become a part of the emotional landscape of your life. So that's the way I just wanted to round up the introduction to this final podcast on of this current series on the nervous system. But one of the ways that we find our way back home and that we become reintegrated with our own body and our nervous system is to reintegrate with the surroundings, our wild ecology, by gathering and eating wild plants. Okay, well, that's it. And I will now let us get on to the conversation with Irene Lyon. So I've been catching up with a lot of your stuff, but there's an interesting thing of how I know about you. It's just that my sister is sort of follows your stuff on the net and so on. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, we were having a conversation in which I was exploring a theme of things unfolding, and I can't even remember what the conversation was. So in what context anything was unfolding, but it was just like that. This was a thing that things needed to unfold. Yeah. And for some reason, she latched onto that and said, "You've got to listen to Irene Lyon." Now, I've listened to quite a lot of your stuff, and I still haven't found you talking about unfolding. So it's quite funny that the connection is not, other than the fact that it got me to listen to your stuff. But anyway, that's.
When you say unfolding, how do you mean?
Well, as I say, I can't actually remember what the conversation was.
How long ago was this conversation?
A couple of years ago.
Oh, wow. Okay. This wasn't just like last month.
No.
Interesting.
No. Huh. So, yeah, no, I haven't got a clue. I mean, I could try and, yeah, no idea. I mean, I think it's an interesting theme, because obviously that's what happens in sort of natural life growth processes and plants and so on. You see that what's happening is kind of, well, it is unfolding, but there's like this potential within the DNA or the physical seed, and this thing is then coming out. You know, it's in there, but the right growth conditions enable it to come out. Totally. So I imagine it could have been something around that sort of idea being applied to us being, you know, potential and unlocked up perhaps, but there's a way for us to unfold and become what we might. You know, that's perhaps
we hope that can happen. But definitely, you know, it's interesting you say it was a few years ago that you were speaking to her and she mentioned my name. It's interesting when I meet people in my classes or workshops or wherever, and they say, you know, I was told about your work, or I remember watching that video and it didn't land. And then, you know, 3 years later, 6 months later, in a conversation with someone else, that topic comes up, and then there's that kind of, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And then the person will dive in again.
Yeah.
And I think that there's an important part here around, you can't push certain things.
Yeah.
Just like you can't, well, I don't know, maybe you can, but you can't force the natural growth process in nature. There's no person standing there, you know, giving it instructions.
Yeah.
It occurs. And I think that's something that's some of the more difficult things for people to learn, is when they're working with the work that I do. And of course, I'm sure we'll get into that conversation, but we've been taught so much to say, well, this is how it happens and you got to follow these steps. But when we enter into that, there's a confusion, because if the path doesn't go exactly how it was written out, then a person gets spiraled into their shame, their feelings of not knowing enough, not figuring it out on their own, and then it stops them. And so there's an organic process that really has to come when we're healing at this level of the nervous system and the body and the somatic system. And it's not something that just can be like flicked on like that.
Yeah.
Especially if we were not raised in a natural, healthy, safe environment where we were allowed to express and had good modeling through our primary caregivers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the one of the themes that we explore quite a bit on the podcast is sort of contrasting trust and control, and also contrasting like machines and organisms. And
mm-hmm.
there's a fantastic metaphor that me and my wife stumbled across years ago. We were looking into cultivating fungi. We never did it, but as a result, we engaged with this material by Paul Stamets on the life process, the cycle and life process of fungi. And it talked about how the spores extend and produce these things called hyphae, and then the hyphae join together, and you have this mycelial mat. But the fruiting body thing, what we know as a mushroom, never occurs until a very elusive set of optimal conditions prevail. And there's been some really, what I find very satisfying stories about people attempting to pin down various wild species of fungi in order to cultivate them for mass production. And there's one in particular called the chanterelle or the girole, and they have got to the point of being able to produce a very healthy mycelial mat. So they can get the spores to do the hyphae bit, they join up, they connect and make this mycelium. What they cannot do after years of research is find out what these elusive optimal conditions are, which cause this fruition to occur. But I mean, it just made me think of that when you were saying that this thing can't actually be locked down or pinned down. But if we enter into the space where we kind of trust the process, that there's something beyond us that takes care of making sure those optimal conditions kick in, and then we will come through. But only if that,
That's huge. That idea of trust, and it really is one of the toughest things to grok, at least currently, is to trust what we're feeling, trust what we're seeing in our mind, what we're visualizing, the emotions, for example. And I was just the other day, this is a good story. I think it's a good story. I was walking near here, where I live. I'm on this point, the ocean, the inlet from the Pacific, and it's gorgeous, and lots of kids and parents out. And there was one of those, I think here it's called a grate, like where the rainwater, you can see down and it goes out to the ocean. And this child, he was maybe 5, maybe 4, old enough to talk and comprehend language, and mom and dad were there, and I came up, and the dad was like, yeah, well, that's where the octopus monsters live. And the mom, I kind of looked at the mom, because the kid was a little confused, and because it wasn't the child naturally saying, oh, Dad, is that where the octopus monsters live? Dad was like, this is where the octopus monsters live. And the mother just kind of rolled her eyes and snickered at me, but you could tell she wasn't in alignment with that kind of education. And I thought, I'm like, wow, it's amazing how much, where is it where we can't just tell the truth? It's like, well, that's actually where it rained last night, and the rain comes in and then it goes in, and you see that big pipe out there going out to the water. That's where it takes all the And it's back to this thing you said of trust and control. What is causing us to not tell the truth to our kids and to trust that it's okay to just be simple? It's like, that's where the rainwater comes from or goes, and you can hear it. It's like, let's get down and hear it. And if the child wanted to make believe that that's where the octopus monsters are from his own internal imagination, then that's another story. But then, of course, you have the situation where that's silly, that's not where the octopus monsters are, that's where the rain is. And then you have this weird dissonance, right? And then just this morning, I was on again, I always go for a walk in the morning. There was another mom with her younger child, probably 3, and they were just standing looking at the vista of the ocean, the mountains. It's so beautiful here in Vancouver, and the city. And he was obviously looking, and she was just telling him, well, there's the ocean, and then you see how there's those buildings and there's all the trees, and he's like, oh, yeah. And then, but then do you see over there, there's the mountains. Well, there's an ocean again behind that. And they were just sitting there watching, and I just thought, what an interesting juxtaposition.
Really huge contrast between.
Huge contrast. And I think of these things, and I start to, in my own mind, go into my map of where along the lines did that first dad, and it's not his fault, that's how he is, but where was it not okay to just be simple with nature versus the mom today that was just being matter of fact, and this is how it is. So that made me think of that whole trust versus control, and there's no script for that, you know. Nothing wrong with octopus monsters, and there's nothing wrong with water runoff from the street, and it's just the contextual way in which we might bring that into conversation with, say, a little person like that.
Yeah. I mean, that other one's pretty edgy, isn't it? That makes you wonder what the dad's motivation for doing that is. But yeah,
my sense is it's not that, you know, it wasn't pre-motivated by any way. It was just, you know, after that I started to think about other ways that we trick and lie and deceive our young with things like, you know, oh, it tastes really good, you'll like it, you know, a new food that a child's never eaten. And so they're told, oh, I guess I'll like this the way I like spaghetti and meatballs. And then maybe it's something that doesn't connect with their system or their palate, and they don't like it. Yeah. And then there's again this rift. It's like, and then they like, I don't want that. And then, but mom told me I have to like it. And that's again another way in which we start to shift our preferences and what we feel is good to us inside.
Yeah.
Right. And there's so many examples there.
Well, yeah. So you're saying to not trust or not listen to what we feel inside, and I've listened to you exploring a theme around just like that. What instinct manages to to give, I guess, to give to other species, whereby they are able to basically do that. They follow this. They just have don't know why, but I feel like I've got to go and pick this stick up and put it over there. Or,
yeah.
No idea why, but I'm just going to go with it, you know.
Yeah.
And then this whole complex sort of fabric unfolds. So there we go. That enables that individual animal to really have an amazing connection with its surroundings, really functional connection, that where everything's taken care of and it's mostly stays pretty safe, and also is able to move in and around the others of its own species, all because it's just going with that little, I think I should do this now, or when such and such happens, goes, oh, okay, well, I don't know why, but in response to that, I'm going to do this. And we kind of have this sense of, oh, they're just dumb animals.
Oh,
and
no.
Yet how dumb are we when actually that's the foundation? If we're smart, that would be the foundation. If we can do something more than that, well, we're not going to be able to do something more than that unless we have that foundation. So, yeah, I just wonder how much of anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. You had a question that almost came out.
Well, just almost like so. I mean, if you don't mind, I'll probably summarize what you do in the introduction. It's just that people, because I don't like to duplicate, and there's loads of podcasts where you explain everything. So I'll just give a quick brief summary, and we can get to the meat, if you don't mind, of where that leads you to be now and how. So what I was going to say is, to what extent do you think that the work that you do with people is actually trying to help them to just be a normal animal that is able to go with that instinctual stuff? Or, I mean, a lot. And I think, you know, your example of the animal just knows to pick that stick up, and again, I use so many examples in my surroundings here. I was watching a crow, you know, there's so many crows around us, but building its nest a little while ago before all the eggs were laid and the baby crows came. But it was just fascinating watching this bird know how to find the sticks, how to put them up there, how to find the grass, put it up there. You know, there's no manual. They're not reading. They're not going to crow school. Watch, you know, this is how it happens. But it's
in them, in their DNA. And, I'm not an expert at bird biology, but my sense is there's no thinking with that, saying this is what I need to do next. It is an inherent, as you said, unfolding. There's a big truck outside. I don't know if you can hear that. Okay?
Yeah, there's actually a bit of interference that started now when you're speaking. I don't know what that is. It's not the truck. It's like a kind of that hangs on your voice.
Is it still there?
No, because I'm talking.
Let me keep talking and you let me know.
That's better. It's clear now.
It was a pretty big, low vibration tone truck. It was a garbage truck that was picking up garbage. It's gone now, but it was there while I was talking.
I see what you mean. Yeah, I think the background noise, it's just that it hung on your actual, whenever you said something, it was there, and when you stopped saying it wasn't there, but that's probably how the mic works. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The vibratory waves were catching it after the fact. So, we have these animals that know how to do exactly what they need to do. They come out of mama, they're doing their thing. The mother typically in the wild knows exactly what to do to take care of their young, whether it's they lick them with mammals, they keep them safe, they keep them protected. I think we can agree with that. That's fairly global with the animal kingdom. And so we've got these animals that just go, they just know. Of course, if you put animals in a zoo, for example, or you have domestic animals, things can get a little messy in there because they don't have their natural ability to roam, and that's another topic.
A lot of the cues that they need to get it to unfold are not there. So
exactly. Yeah. And so then we have the human, and we have I've been talking about this more, that we have the animal part of us, and then we have the human part of us. And the animal part of us has that nervous system that is autonomic. It's the same nervous systems that reptiles and other animals have in terms of the fight, flight, the freeze. Even with mammals, that social engagement ability to turn your head and smile and blink and do faces. You can do that with a dog, with a cat.
Yeah.
Cows, even, they'll kind of look at you. They're not as engaging, but they still will look at you.
They're all fellow mammals. Yeah.
Exactly. Cows usually look at you like you're crazy, but I think that's because they can see through us a bit more. But and so we have that social engagement, wired, autonomic nervous system thing going on for us as humans. But then we have this higher brain thing up here that is huge in comparison to other animals, other mammals. And it's so complex. And with that complexity, there's a reason why it takes us a long time to mature. We have to come out of mom before our head gets too big, or else it's not going to happen. And we're not mature within a few years. Far from it. We are still infants. We're toddlers. We're immature animals. Our development is so long, and of course, that development is different based on how our environment is. And so, if you take a child and put them in a kennel, and actually, have you ever come across Bruce Perry's work? Dr. Bruce Perry, he's an American
I've not studied it directly, but I've heard quite a few people, including you, talking about
Bruce Perry. Yeah, so he's I think he's still based in Texas, but he has his books are beautiful. One of them is called Born for Love. One is called, oh my goodness, it's going out of my mind right now. The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. Right. That's what it was. And so in his books, he talks about the effects of adversity, the effects of neglect, the effects of not learning empathy, and why that happens. And I've got, there's so many amazing stories, and there are some situations where if you put a human into extremely neglectful circumstances, like in an orphanage, he talks about that often, locked in a room, which sadly occurs in some instances, and just the abuse that occurs in our society, in our world, that human will not have the social cues. They will not know how to take care of themselves. They will be an animal. They might, if they aren't talked to, this is the thing, if a human isn't talked to, it's not like the bird outside that I can hear chirping that just knows how to chirp and sing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And again, I'm sure there's a biologist that would say, well, if you just left a bird alone without its mother, it also wouldn't survive. And I'm not sure about that, because when I was a little girl, I had a pet crow. True story. Some kids brought this baby crow to the back of my dad's clinic. He was a veterinarian, is a veterinarian, retired, both mom and dad. And there was this little tiny bird that they brought to us, and we raised it in our kitchen. And it was a crow. It knew how to do crow-like everything. And eventually, when it got big enough, we took it to the wildlife sanctuary. He let him away. I think my dad said that, oh, he might come back. And I think I was so sad because I'd grown so attached to this crow. But that crow still developed even though we were humans. Mm-hmm. But if you were to take a human baby and put it in a cage with a bunch of crows, or even a bunch of cats or dogs, it wouldn't be the same.
Yep.
And that is the clincher. That's the clincher with humans, is that this higher brain is so complex. Complex isn't even the right word, Miles. It's like complex to infinity and beyond. I mean, look at what we've developed here with the technology. I often joke that I'm still amazed at the copy and paste feature on the computer. Like, how does that happen? You know, how do we have planes in the sky and all these things that we've developed and engineered? That's from this. And so we have this higher brain, and then we have our animal parts of our brain. When we're born, if we're given good nurture, good nature, clean environment, healthy food, movement, activity, stimulation, boundaries, I mean, all this stuff that creates a healthy human, that human becomes mature in society, etc. I'm really simplifying this. But if that human is brought up with rules that are beyond what I would call acceptable, rules that are what we would consider micro traumas, conditions. I'll love you if you do this. You know, that emotion is not accepted in this home. That expression of your dance and creativity, which is part of this higher brain, that's not acceptable. You don't do that in this house. That's what you do at dance class. I mean, these are just random examples. I mean, the things that I've heard my clients tell me that they, you know, and so what happens with that is that that brain that has so much creative complexity and just amazingness is stunted. It isn't developed in the way that it could. And then you put in the autonomic parts of how trauma gets stuck in the nervous system, how that fear gets stuck in the nervous system, and then that compounds also the ability for that brain to not only create, but to develop and grow. There's always differing opinions out there, but the last I saw, that the human brain is still developing at age 28. And so this is where we get, I forget what the original thought was, but yeah, that's how I see it. It's this oversimplified version of it, and we can get into it more. But animals in the wild don't question how to take care of their young when they come out. They know what to do.
Yeah. And so, I mean, there's the process that you're describing there, I think, and I sort of locked in on this unfolding thing because it's helping me sort of follow it through or track it through. You know, and there's a couple of things there. Is one, as you said about the animal in the zoo, that then doesn't unfold, doesn't become, the instinctual thing is not able to lead it on this journey, because So the cues are lacking, but also in that situation and in the one where the child's been told don't dance here and whatever, there's an attempted unfolding, which is then stuffed back inside kind of thing.
Squash.
So so it's like, no, you can't. So that it gets locked in, so the full thing doesn't come out. But also, I've thought a lot about this kind of zoo idea, you know, animals in cages and so on. And I guess it sort of came out because we've got guinea pigs, and we, for a long time, we kept them not in cages in the garden, but there's holes in the fence. 2 of them got out, and we never saw them again. So until I can hack back the brambles and fix that fence, unfortunately, they're in cages again. But the interesting thing was we were just watching all the different plants that they eat in the garden, and I was bringing plants that weren't in the garden and feeding them to them. And then when they're in the cage, of course, they're totally reliant on either what's on the lawn and underneath them, or what we stick through the cages. And it made me realize, actually, we're a lot like that, because if we aren't foraging in the wild or intimately connected with the sources of our food, we are like animals in cages, which the industrial food system is just stuffing through what it chooses to feed us. And so if you see that the food is just one aspect, and that's just an illustration of the whole situation, we are in a zoo, because the cues that we would have got as wild hunter-gatherers, there was no wall and no barrier, no mediation at all. And so the instinct within us to connect and relate to things outside would have caused a profound kind of unfolding. So I guess that's something that I'm very keen to explore, how, you know, what we start out with. If we see a person now, and like in your work, say, how can I assist this person and walk with them to become whole? You know, it isn't just the childhood trauma. It isn't just, you know, it's the industrial system that has actually locked us in cages, which mean we are not able to just develop our nervous system, apart from anything else, you know, in order to be a fully developed human being, you know, as in the species Homo sapien. What a Homo sapien that's been let free to have that two-way flow between itself and its surroundings, what that would become. You know, we are not becoming that, whatever that is now.
Yeah, we've become something that is, to use your word, unfolding, appropriate. But yeah, I mean, and I'm gapping on a quote that one of my book mentors said, Robert Scayer. He's quite connected with Peter Levine. He's a medical doctor, psychologist, studies trauma. And there's a term in our work called procedural memory. I don't know if you've come across that, but it's I'll break it down really simply. If a soccer ball, or in your country, a football, is coming to my head on the pitch, and I see it, there's going to be an automatic cover, right?
Yeah. If
I drop the knife when I'm cutting onions and I'm wearing bare feet, I'm going to jump back.
Yeah.
There's a program, there's a instruction, a procedure that I don't even have to think about, that just does that thing. And sometimes we can't do that. Maybe the ball is coming and we see something else, it distracts us, and then it bonks us in the head. We had no time to self-protect and defend. So that's a procedural memory. If we think of humans currently, and by currently I mean domesticated. So you mentioned the Industrial Revolution. Before that, there was the domestication of plants and animals. Not my expertise, but we know it happened. We know that it shifted things dramatically when we stopped being nomadic and caging things and having plots of land. But as we started to control in that way, and then of course industry came in, this was happening before industry, our expression of the natural impulse of those procedural memories, it didn't just flick off like a light switch. It slowly started to kind of die. And so that child that wants to cry when it scrapes its knee falling off of its bike. I mean, I don't know if you've scraped your knee as an adult. I did it the other day or the other month. It hurts. I had forgotten how much it hurts to abrade skin on concrete. It stings. It hurts.
Horrible.
You kind of want to cry. You kind of want to swear at yourself or at the situation. So if you think about that emotion that comes out of us, and then you think of a 5-year-old, and you think, how is that 5-year-old interacted with when that occurs? Are they told, that doesn't really hurt, just get up, be a big boy, be a big girl, like it's not that bad? The moment we put that in, the moment we make those conditions, that's the procedural memory, that's the expression, the automatic expression, the unfolding, if you will, to use your word, of the biology doing what it needs to do to take care of that. If an animal in the wild is injured, it doesn't keep running typically. It might get eaten. And then it doesn't have to worry about the trauma of that injury because it's now food for someone else or for something else, for another animal. But if it does injure itself, it will go into hiding before it comes out because it knows that it won't be able to protect young, themselves, hunt, et cetera, et cetera. So this loss, I guess you could say, of that natural impulse, it's very, very old, and it's happened in increments throughout the human history, as we know. And getting that back isn't easy. And it's not easy when we've also had that upbringing where the parent was like, that doesn't hurt. If we had that, it's going to be a little harder, because even if we had the parent that saw us fall, so I'll give you that scenario, because a lot of parents are like, well, what are you supposed to do when a kid, right, falls? And again, that shows it's no one's fault, but that shows our lack of intuition on how to deal with that. So when someone falls, and granted it's safe, they go through a disorientation process. They go into survival. They feel nothing but energy and sensation and pain. If we try to scoop that child up or interfere when their autonomic nervous system is still processing that stress, we interrupt that procedural need to take care. And again, granted it's safe. If the kid falls on a road and cars are coming, you got to scoop them up.
Move it. Move
them to the side. So we'll be smart and know that there's distinctions there. But let's just say you're on your driveway, you're on a cul-de-sac, you're on a country road, you fall. And so the parent sees this. You need to go to them, but you need to wait. You need to let them, the cry, the expression, just like if a lion is protecting, it's like, they're not going to hold back and say, oh, that hyena is trying to get my cubs. I better not, frighten the hyena.
Yeah.
And so the child cries, wails. And if you let that child wail long enough and you are there, you don't interfere, but you let them know you're there energetically. You don't even have to say, I'm here. They'll feel you because we're energetic beings. There's a moment where that child will finally look up with the tears and the snot, and the red face. And as soon as they go to lock eyes and engage with you, that's that polyvagal social engagement. They've gone through this stress response. The stress responses come down, they look, and then when they look, then that's the hands. That's like, I'm hurt. And then that's where you, oh, sweetie, this must, you're, and that's where you then can say, you're okay. And let's get that cleaned up. Do you want me to kiss it? Do you want a hug? And at that point, if the kid says, no, I don't want a hug, you got to say, okay. But, there's this it's like the moment we override their impulse, we're screwing up with their consent, essentially. And then their impulses of saying, no, I don't want a hug, are confused because, oh, I said no, but mom's doing it, or I want this. And so there's a very interesting dynamic when you just take down that kind of example of how to help the natural impulse and really the healing come out organically. But because I'm using the example of a 5-year-old, they don't have the emotional knowledge on how to take care of that. And so we have to help guide and model that. And then the other piece to that is that's not a script that we have written. It's written in our genetics, but our conditioning has kind of bleached it out of us. Why is it that that scenario, if you use that as scenario, why is it some families will know that intuitively and others won't? And it doesn't matter what country you're in.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's because of, again, how was that parent, how was that adult treated when they were young?
Yeah.
They'll have ideas on how to deal with that.
I mean, I think it's interesting what you said earlier, that there's differences with people around the world and how they approach childcare and so on, and yet there's a more consistent thing with other mammals because it's more instinctive. I mean, I think there is a certain amount of culture in these other mammals, but I definitely would agree that on the whole it's coming out of instinct. I just wonder how much of what we have now is culture that's kind of falling into this category that you're describing, that people are sort of embodying trauma in the culture, so therefore traumatizing, and it just goes on and on. So, you know, the point being that you could sort of walk away from this discussion and say, oh, well, you know, leaving your kids to cry that's the culture if you follow that particular school. And, you know, there is a culture of that because lots of people did it. So that's their culture. I mean, and on the other hand, you could point to other things and create a case for, well, actually, this way of raising children, yeah, it's our culture and we've got all kinds of practices around it, and nuts and bolts of how we work it out in this particular context, in this landscape or whatever. But this kind of raising children is in tune with our DNA, you know, because I think that's the kind of argument we've got to be able to make, you know, I mean, for example, just a real simple point would be that simple kindness and a basic thing of responsiveness, that's in our DNA, you know, whereas this hardball kind of, you know, refusal to respond and then justifying it with some elaborate theory.
It's in our DNA, but it also can get shifted based on our environment. This comes back to epigenetics and just how, you know, just because you have a code in the DNA doesn't mean that it's going to express. It depends on how we're treated, what's modeled. I want to go back to the thing about crying, because someone will have heard what you just said and they're going to get confused. So I want to just clean that up. The example of the child that's 5, for example, riding a bike and letting him,
that one you let cry, yeah,
scream it out. You know, it's like rage, pain, hurt. Very different than a newborn infant who's screaming and crying and needs something. That is a very touchy subject in a lot of pediatric clinicians, where, you know, it used to be crying it out was what you did to teach children how to become tougher and self-regulate. Now we know damn well that that is abusive and that is neglect. And there's generations. I mean, I'm sure my parents, I don't know about my mother. I mean, again, this is where, depending on where you are, my mother's from the Philippines. So, you know, grew up in the barrio, very simple living on a farm. It's different there because you actually have the baby on you most of the time, or there's always siblings in that. And when you're in the villages in the Philippines, you never hear an infant cry. You don't. They'll fuss, but then they're taken care of. If you see a child crying, it's because they've hurt themselves. Right. And so there are differences in some cultures, societies, etc. But the crying it out, we know, is just it puts the child, just to clean that up, into a stress response if they aren't self-regulated with an adult that has a higher level of regulation on board. So that right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm glad you cleared that up. I can see how that could have led to a misunderstanding. So,
Yes, I'm
but
very careful about that one.
yeah, no, well spotted. But the thing there with I think it's really interesting to contrast the two crying situations, because
Mhm.
that 5-year-old is crying because it's something it's working out on its own. I
Yeah.
guess the cry to some extent has a function of making sure somebody in the tribe is aware there's a problem here.
Hmm.
But as you say, the main thing is he's working out the trauma in his own body, and this is between him and his own knee, basically. And and
Got
and,
it.
and yet that child, the baby, the cry is one function and one function only, and that's to tell you I need help.
Something's
And
wrong.
and for us to adopt a philosophy that basically says that, you try hearing a baby cry, and you've basically got to shut down your instinct, because it's a call and response. That child's cry is telling you, go and help your baby. Your whole body is saying, I need to go and help this baby. And now you're sitting there in the other room going, no, I'm not going to do that.
Unless you're
Doing
not.
to.
And this is where it gets interesting, because
Mm,
yes, we would think that a parent hears the infant crying and there is that oh my gosh, I have to go and help them. But that's not always the case. And so
mm,
if the parent isn't attuned to their own biology, and if they
right.
weren't attuned to when they
Mm,
were young,
mm,
they're not going to understand. And they may know something's wrong. And I've worked with clients on this with their infants, where they know something isn't right and they can't pinpoint it. And it's not for lack of wanting to. They really are like, I don't know what this is. And at that point, and it's like, okay, yes, your intuition is correct. Something is not right. And let's try to figure this out. And then there's the adult parent who it doesn't even enter that that's a problem, because they're in their own state of shutdown, right? They're living in their own state of functional freeze, or even more than that. I'll never forget. I have these vignettes in my life where I remember times where I hear babies crying, and one was very particular. About 5 years ago, I was in a very warm drugstore, we call it here in Canada, and it was I think it was maybe even snowing. It was cold, it was rainy, it was freezing outside. So, everyone's wearing all their gear and the babies are all dressed up in their stuff, and then I entered into this drugstore, and of course the heat is just blasting, fluorescent lights, all the smell of detergent, which I'm quite sensitive to, as an infant would be as well. And I felt I was angered, and I also felt sorry and sad for this mother who was screaming at her newborn baby
mm.
because the baby wouldn't stop crying. And she was doing something, she was getting something, and it's alone, it's red, it's crying. And I looked at the child, I heard the cry, and I could see the sweat. Like it was
Yeah,
just,
yeah, yeah,
it
yeah.
was hot.
Mm,
Its temperature, I mean, I can't regulate in the, unbutton my jacket and my hair's up,
mm.
and so she didn't. And again, it's not because she doesn't care and love that child. She just had no instinctual knowing of, oh, we were just outside, little one's all bundled up, red in the face. Oh my God, you're hot. Let me,
Yeah.
loosen up your clothes. No cue to that. And I don't remember what she was wearing, but chances are she was still bundled up. But at that age, we can shut down our physiology and what it's telling us. So there's this interesting spectrum where, yes, we would think that if someone is hearing their baby cry, that would put them into, because it's supposed to
Right.
put us into
Yeah,
distress.
yeah, yeah.
And then we soothe them, and in soothing them, we as the adult also soothe. But if that cue is not there due to our own misattunement to our own
Yeah,
biology, we won't
yeah.
be able to attune to the little ones. So that's where it gets dicey, I think.
And I'm sure it's dicey on thousands of fronts, actually, because if you think about what's happening with that mum, she's busy, she's preoccupied,
Yes.
and actually
Yes.
her anxiety level is a big factor in the fact that she can't
listen to these subtle cues that are happening. Well, not so subtle cues, blatantly obvious cues, like a baby being red and sweating, you know. But I just feel that where we are these days, you know, with most people so out of kilter, you know, locked into these sort of things, preoccupation and too much to do, and one thing or another, and the fact really that, you know, there is this amazing system that's in place, you know, in terms of ecology, the interpersonal sphere, our own bodies, you know, they're just remarkable, extraordinarily subtle, finely tuned organic things which are able to take the smallest cue and make this little adjustment, this little response, this movement, whatever. And create this thing that makes sure that the whole thing is flourishing and thriving. Just to see how many of those subtle cues are just falling on deaf ears, as it were, or touching callous skin. What does that do to us? Because each one of those things is wanting to trigger a little adjustment, which means it's well for me, it's well for you, it's also well for the landscape, the whole thing. And we're just going, can't hear you, sorry, can't hear that, sorry. And that is the nature of our civilization, our so-called, I keep want to find another word for civilization, because uncivilization, you know, that's the nature of it. We're deaf, dumb, and blind. We can't be moved.
Mm-hmm.
What a mess. Yeah.
It is. And, you know, those cues that you mentioned, you posed the question, which is what happens when you don't listen to those cues? Well, this is what happens. Look at what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
You know, look at all the illness, all the chronic illness, the cancer. I mean, yes, that's also environmental. It's what we're eating, etc. But it's not just one thing. No. And, you know, I like my examples, but, you know, do you know Gabor Mate? Have you ever come across this? So he is so eloquent in his descriptions, but he has this description about cancer, you know, and he's often said quite blatantly in talks, we don't need to do any more research in terms of human health. Like other stuff, yes, but health in the human being and the healing of the human, we don't need to know any more research. He's quite adamant about that, and I agree with him. Do we need to research how to make better prosthesis for people who lost their limbs? 100%. But in terms of chronic illness, etc., it's like we don't need any more, because we know it is a result of stress, chronic stress, adversity, misattunement to ourselves, to our environment, lack of connection to it, and just absolute empathy that is built when we have self-regulation, when we have that connection with a primary caregiver that really nurtures us. Mm-hmm. And so that's one thing that I love that he said. The other is you cannot study cancer or the cure for cancer by studying the cell. You can't studying the cure for cancer by studying the cell is like trying to solve a traffic jam, on a you know, roundabout, by studying the internal combustion engine. It just doesn't work. And so we're trying to bombard and break down the cell and study the cell and figure out the cell to try to figure out why are all these diseases happening. And he's all about, and I'm all about, well, we have to look at the bigger picture. And so these micro sensations, the cues, even a person's ability to feel their own digestion is primarily washed out of people because they're not connected to the viscera. But we're also not taught to connect to the viscera. Mm-hmm. And if we are that, to use our little kid that falls off his bike example, you know, if that kid is shut down as soon as it's feeling its pain, that is one little drop in the bucket of him not knowing how to feel the sensations. And it just grows from there, Miles. It just keeps growing and growing. And over time, we get to be, my husband used a word the other day, I might get it wrong. Is it automaton? Like robots, just sheep, going down the lane, not it's not even about authority, questioning authority, it's questioning our own impulse. And it's not because, and the reason why people aren't questioning their own impulses, they don't even know how to listen to their own impulses anymore. And that is some of the first pieces when I do work with clients and students. We start with that. How do you start to listen to your biology when you've maybe never even considered it until that day when you get sick? Right? That's kind of when people wake up to, sadly, it's like as soon as something is really bad, then it's like, oh boy, I better clean up my diet. I better clean up my emotions. And it doesn't have to be that way, but we tend to wait till the worst possible point and then we figure things out.
Yeah, when you reach that crisis point.
Yeah. The body literally, as Gabor would say, says no. It says it can't do this anymore. And yet that cancer, that heart disease, the thinning of the gut that leads to IBS, the tumors, all of it doesn't just happen overnight. It builds until the body can't take it anymore, right? And so we're going around thinking that everything's fine, but actually it probably isn't. Again, granted, you're not connected to this system. Interestingly enough, when you start to connect to the system and you start to work with it, it can change quite quickly because it wants to be well. It's like the earth, you know. I'm not sure how accurate this is, but because of all the less emissions in the atmosphere due to people not driving planes, someone had said that the ozone has been healing, the layer has been healing, the waters are cleaner, the air here is so clean. And it happened quite quickly.
Yeah.
But the earth also doesn't have that higher brain, to go back to what we were talking about a second ago, that's saying, wait a second, maybe you shouldn't do that. Right? That higher brain programming in the human is what causes a lot of people to have resistance, self-sabotage. They go back into their old patterns. Whereas the earth, as long as we leave it alone, it knows how to self-generate and heal. And our biology knows that too, but then we have this thing up here that's getting in the way.
So one of the things I wanted to draw out, because I'm aware that it's a theme you explore quite a bit, like the fact that here we are animals, but then we're animals with this extra capacity. And you know, that extra capacity has given rise to all of these incredible technologies, but on the whole, it's hard to find one of those technologies that doesn't have an extraordinary downside, you know, in terms of affecting this lack of attunement, this lack of responsiveness and lack of exposure. You know, these things are basically creating layers of insulation, which means that we're not exposed to the cues and the signals in the first place, because we're so stuck inside literal buildings with walls, but also the worlds that we create with our preoccupations with phones and whatever.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm sure you must have, and I'm really working on creating something that I can articulate along these lines as well. You know, what is the wonderful thing about humans? You know, that how could we? You know, I mean, you know, what could we be? You know, given that we have this, you know, and we know what we have been. We've been hunter-gatherers and all the beautiful things about that. Not to say it's perfect, but like, you know, those societies did have extraordinary depth of wisdom and quality of life and beautiful reciprocal relation with the land, far beyond anything we can even dream of just now. But like, we can't go back there as such, you know, to that exact, you know, but, you know, Irene, you know, what could we be, given that we are animals still, we're biological, we're not going to become machines, you know, but we have this higher brain capacity and this ability to use that brain capacity to relate in an incredible way, you know. So, you know, where could we be? What could we be?
Well, I think if we take it to the nth degree and really look at that question, I mean, it's a great question. Where could we be? It's something that I think many wouldn't believe is possible. We think of some of the movies, so to speak, that talk about telepathy and utopia and beauty and people living in harmony. I do believe that we have that potential. What I've studied about the human system, and we getting into other things that I tend to not talk about as much, but intergalactic civilizations and other places where I've read and witnessed, not witnessed personally, but just things are at a level where there's no competition, there's no even speech. We have this, and I've worked with this, this notion that we don't have higher powers than what we see here. I think really, I personally want others to start to look at. I've been studying over the past years. Have you ever come across Lynn McTaggart, The Field? Does that ring a bell to you? Did you ever watch the movie What the Bleep? It was a documentary on quantum physics.
No.
Anyway, she talks about in her books, one of them is called The Field, one is called The Power of Eight. She's a reporter, and she just landed into this trail of studying the human capacity to have powers to intend things.
Right.
And this was actually looked at a long time ago with the power of group prayer and group intention. I mean, this is why we meditate. Not, people have group meditations globally now to help heal the planet. That's not just because someone decided, oh, this might be a cool thing to do.
It's a nice gesture. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not just that. It's like when you look at the old research, which really got shut down from a lot of scientists, they had some pretty conclusive evidence that shows that you can intend and change things with your mind. I believe in psychic capacity, but to be able to have that higher level means that the physical biology has to be well. If our system isn't working well internally, it's hard to get to those next levels of evolution, if we want to call it that. And so it's so difficult when all we know is struggle and strife and survival and paying the bills and meeting our rent payments and all these things. But I do believe, I hope that we can get to a point where we're about creation, we're about connection. We're like those hunter-gatherers on the fields with our children, eating, foraging, hunting, dancing, creating art. We can't go back to that the way it was, right? I don't think we're just going to bulldoze all of our homes and get dirt and start planting things everywhere. I don't think that's going to happen. However, what I have seen is that, yes, we live in these boxes that are homes and we're caged, but when we can connect with our biology and really work to get out of that survival, this doesn't feel as like an entrapment. It actually, I don't feel in my home that I'm boxed, that I'm caged. I can connect to the sky and the trees that I see out there. I don't feel like there's a wall here, but we see it as that. But if we energetically can connect with what is around us, we start to realize that, not to sound too woo-woo, but I will, it's all energy, it's all different vibrations, and we can move through things and intend a lot of goodness. So that's kind of a weird way of saying my viewpoint, my vision is that we can be amazing as a society, as a humanity, and it requires more of us becoming what I would say regulated in our nervous system, regulated in how we connect with others, with nature, with animals. Peter Levine, one of my mentors who founded Somatic Experiencing, he has said many times over again, and he's a very spiritual man. He is into the energies, he's into archetypes and our ancestors and such. And he doesn't talk about it very much, but he believes in it. But he said true human enlightenment will happen when all human beings on this planet have a regulated nervous system. That's a big statement, right?
Yeah.
And yet, if you just could drop into that, if that were true, there will be no violence, no war, no abuse of our bodies, no abuse of the land. We would know how to raise our children, and it would technically be utopic, whatever that means. Yeah. But but we don't know it because we haven't felt it. We haven't seen it in enough community. You know, we're still figuring out what community even is. We're still figuring out the color of our skin, and that we all are the same, and yet we're still so divided. And so that's how I see it. I mean, I've just seen little glimpses. I do hope that can happen. It can happen. It's just a question of, we need to reach kind of that tipping point where enough people wake up and go, oh, I'm not living in this matrix. I don't have to live in this conditioned program where this is exactly what I do and this is how I follow orders.
Yeah.
And I don't mean orders from like the government. It's like an internal, the biology has been so structured around the programs that we've been taught. And it's a very delicate beast to heal.
Well, I mean, to me, it all comes back to the fact that when we're able to relate, when we're able to touch and be touched, you know, which I do think that the aspect of, you know, landscape that with our biology is necessitates that we have that reciprocal flow with our surroundings, even if it's just seeing a branch of a tree moving. You know, we're used to seeing something along those lines all the time. You know, for us to feel settled. You know, I mean, I personally notice how just going to the woods or something, that is immediately I'm in another space. You know, there's and what's happening is it's like having a person that smiles and nods, or gives me a hug, or talks in a very welcoming way. You know, you see those, you're getting cues from your surroundings that are basically like that. They're saying welcome. They're saying, you know, you're here, you're with us, you're part of this. It's not necessarily, you don't have to think that the tree has an intelligence and is talking to you, whether you want to think that or not. But like this stuff happens on a very visceral level that you do feel. And so those kind of, but that's just one of many kinds of cues. The fact that we're basically shut down and not able. So the you know, the regulation thing is a consequence of the fact that we're able to touch and be touched. And the sabotage is that, we are not able to do that. We're not able to open to feel. And if we do feel, we recoil and
it's scary. Like so, it's a scary thing. 100%, you know, that nature is, well, we are it. Right?
This is nature too. This body.
That if someone has never considered that, I think it's an important place to start. Because again, we've been industrialized, we've been domesticated, so we have forgotten that we are actually part of the organism of this planet and the universe. So that's number one. Number two, yes, there's a reason why when we go out and we're connecting in a conscious way, I'm always looking at this tree, that's where I'm looking, you know, like, that the branches, there's wind. Like I can't see the air, but there's a movement.
You can see the traces of it.
Exactly. There's the clouds and they're shifting. But here's the thing, if someone is shut down or dissociated or in anxiety, they ain't looking at that, because that is a level of social engagement that they don't have capacity for. And so that's one piece. And then another interesting piece, because I know that a lot of people will listen to this and they don't have these beautiful trees and nature the way you might in your backyard. And I've noticed with my students, like I have so many plants in my house, like tons and tons of them. And always when I'm with my groups over time, we will have at least a few people say, this is so strange. And they usually live alone, because a lot of people are living alone, not just because of the current crises, but they live alone. They're not partnered. But they'll say, wow, like my plants are doing way better. It's true. Like I have pictures of my students' plants that were once dead and now they're alive. And they didn't do anything differently, but their system is more regulated and they're attuning to their, even though it's their box of a home, the bit of life that is in their home, and that organism feels it. And I think that, I mean, if that isn't enough of a anecdotal evidence piece to show that we as humans have the potential to change nature, I mean, there it is. And you know, so there's the people that have the plants and they notice, shit, I'm not killing them anymore, they're thriving. And then there's others who are all of a sudden craving plants in their home, and they're going out and they're buying them and they're tending them. And if you have plants, you know that you can't just water them on a schedule, right? You have to water them based on the environment, the time of year. Every plant's different. That's like the baby. It's attuning to a living organism and listening. So I think there's so many ways that we can reconnect to that, even if we don't have the luxury of, you know, the ocean and mountains that I have here in Vancouver.
I mean, I think it's fascinating with the houseplant example.
Yeah.
Because, you know, at first I thought you were primarily, I mean, perhaps you were, but I thought you were primarily indicating that these people energetically had boosted the liveliness of these plants, so they're flourishing. But then it became clear that what you were saying about attunement, so these people being more well, they probably were just more sensitive to the needs of their plants on maybe quite an obvious level, like that.
I think it's both. I think I think it's the energy, because when we are, you know, again, we forget we are electric beings, you know, that's how our nervous system works. And so when we have more regulation, a few things happen. We attune better to ourselves, so then we attune better to our environment. Many people will even say, wow, I have an urge to clean my house. That's never happened before. I have an urge to prepare food in a way that's different. And I'm not telling them to do this. This is just an impulse that's coming out. So there's that regulation because they're attuning better. But then as you become more attuned, it's because you're becoming more regulated at the nervous system level, and the energy around the organisms that are alive feel it. It's the same with pets.
Yeah.
Man, I growing up in the animal hospitals that my parents had, and literally when I was little, it was in our house for a while. And then I became young. As I was older, I would work for them. It was so clear that the nervous, frantic dogs, usually dogs and sometimes cats, you could just see it in the owner. You know, it's like it was out of this world. And as I've gotten to know more people in this work, sometimes pets will take on the illness of the owner because they just do. They're these energetic beings, and it might be the only sense of connection that owner has. And we can transfer illnesses to people. It's a way of, it's one of the fawning responses. It's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Right. And that fawning can happen in that way. And it happens even in homes with children, where a child will intuitively, in a weird way, get sick because they know, if I'm sick and meek, my parent will have something to take care of. Yeah. It's a very interesting thing. So yeah, energy is huge. Regulation is huge. It all connects to the same pot, so to speak.
So I think it'd be great, Irene, if you could just tell people basically what it is you do. We've just done a series of 3 podcasts prior to this one, all of which are roughly based around polyvagal theory, but basically exploring nervous systems, the fact that bodies are part of nature, and that there's some just amazing sophisticated stuff that's going on there, and obviously some things that are going wrong, and what polyvagal theory and other work around the nervous system, such as Peter Levine and so on, with the somatic somatic, what is it called again? Somatic.
Well, there's somatic experiencing.
Somatic experiencing. That's what
Peter's.
Yeah.
Peter. Yeah.
So those guys doing that kind of work that's really shining some light on how we could maybe get back into, as I'm presenting on the podcast, it's like get back into the wild, like affirming wild as being this amazing, sophisticated, self-organizing, complex thing that's really good. So I'm aware that your work fits very nicely into that whole world, but perhaps you could tell people what it is you do?
Yeah, it's not simple, but I'll give it a shot.
Okay.
So yeah, for example, the work of Peter Levine I've studied. I've had the pleasure of being at many of his classes and such. So that is a big portion. And his work really was, I mean, it's again a huge body of work, but the premise is that us as humans, as you know, we've been talking, are not connected to our natural, true human nature. I would even go far to say our animal nature, because of culture, because of society, because of just the way that we've domesticated ourselves. And so his work is really recognizing that we do have this nervous system, this autonomic nervous system, that becomes stuck in survival. We need survival, right? If I was to go and have an accident, I would want my system to go into a stress response to protect, to preserve, et cetera, et cetera. However, when that accident is over and I am safe, that survival is not needed anymore. But as humans, because of, again, this higher brain of ours and our conditions, and not allowing the expression of whatever it is that we might need to express, emotion, pain, grief, sadness, anger, etc., we stay stuck in that survival mode. And then over time, and the research is showing this, that creates illness, both chronic illness, things like autoimmune, depression, anxiety, but also mental. So Peter's work is a portion of my work. Another portion of my work is working, and again, his is body based. And then another portion is through a woman by the name of Kathy Kane. She is also one of Peter's colleagues, one of his faculty, but she's also created a form of work that works deeply with the somatic body system. Again, Peter's works with the body. Hers is more directed to places like the stress organs, like the kidneys, the adrenals, the brainstem, the gut, the hypothalamus, the skin, all of the organ systems of the body she works with. So that's also something that I'm trained in. And then prior to that, I was trained, are you familiar with the work of Moshe Feldenkrais, the Feldenkrais method?
Other than hearing you touch on it in some of the material I've listened to,
right.
No.
Yeah. So that was kind of my first entry point in my mid-20s into neuroplasticity and working with this more mind-body environment connection, which is a big, I think, differentiating factor with this work is we're not just working with the mind and the body, or the body and the mind, but we're looking at how does it connect with the external world. And so Dr. Feldenkrais's work was very much around how do we teach humans how to learn better, how to relearn patterns, movements, behaviors, sensations. How do we learn how to sense better, how to differentiate? And so that work is, to me, really more a theory of learning than a method. And so my work brings all those pieces together. I was in private practice doing these methodologies with people one-on-one. I stopped because I realized that people needed more than just an hour with me a week. Wasn't enough. Just like I often use the analogy, you can't learn a second language as an adult with 1 hour a week.
Yeah.
To be fluent, like 100% fluent. You need to study it. You need to live and breathe it. You need to be thrown into situations that aren't comfortable, but are still safe. And so the work I've created is teaching people how to really become their own medicine. That's how I speak to it. And I'm going to put that aside. When someone comes and they have a traumatic experience, or they know that their chronic illness or their mental illness is a result of adversity, traumas that have never been healed, the typical model, even in my field, is to say, okay, what is your trauma? Let's work on it. Let's go into the body and see what we're noticing. So there's like this, the intention is to work on that thing. I've kind of reversed that in the work I've done online with the groups I do, where we're not asking you, what is the trauma you want to work with? You may know it very well. You may not know it, because if we have got traumas that are in utero, birth, early, intergenerational, you're not going to remember the events. It's completely somatic. It's in the cell, right? It's in the patterns of behavior. And so to try to unpack that with the person one-on-one, in my opinion, it's not that it's impossible, but it's really difficult. And so I teach people through a series of many weeks how to reconnect with this biology, how to reconnect with their impulse. Some things are as simple as listening to when you have to go to the bathroom. Like, when is your bladder needing to urinate? When is your rectum needing to have a bowel movement? When are you thirsty? When are you full? When are you desiring to lay down, et cetera, et cetera. And as simple as that is, that's sort of an entry point into growing capacity. And so basically the work is working at all these somatic levels through various exercises that I've created with all those methods in mind. And to me, it's growing capacity, because when we have been shut down, Miles, and we've had, not enough expression, not enough connection with our internal and how we connect and see the world, our capacity is like really small. And when our capacity is small to feel and sense and express, there's no way in hell that the traumas are going to naturally come up, because the system is pretty smart. It knows this person's capacity is too small. We can't process that horrific abuse that occurred when we were, born age 0 to age 10, because we don't have enough resource on board to deal with the tsunami of sensation and memory and panic and shutdown and dissociation that might come up. And so rather than try to work on little pieces of the trauma, we just build the capacity as big as we can. We educate people on all the theory. I'm all about teaching my people exactly what I've learned in my trainings. I don't hold back. And by and large, with time and of course trust and them honoring their impulses, they will start to heal and release old traumas without having to go find them. And when that can happen, it really is an unfolding, right? We're teaching the human how to be organic again, essentially.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And to trust that organic nature, because I can tell you, our programming, our shaming, how we were shamed, how we were told that we're stupid, you're worthless, like all these horrific things that kiddos are told by their primary caregivers, that programming runs deep. And so when we're working with this as adults, there's a delicate fine line, because that voice, those voices, we call them interjects in the psychology world, where someone watching this will know, like, oh, you're stupid, you can't do that, I've never been good at anything, you can't do that, you can't make that much money, you can't fall in love, I always screw up relationships. So these are interjects that are just implanted in that higher brain, right? And so we build capacity, but we also warn people, like, those things will come in because of the higher brain. We don't want you to wipe that out, because if we were to wipe that out, that would mean that you would be brain damaged, and we don't want you to damage your brain, right? And so we're just building this capacity so the system can trust again. And also recognizing, yep, this higher brain is probably going to knock on your door every now and again and say, hey, don't do that. And that's where we have to say, no, it's okay to do that, but you have to do it in a way that feels good, as opposed to forcing and willfully pushing through the healing. And a lot of the current methods and models of healing, at least at this level, are focused on kind of finding an end goal. Like, I will be healed when all this stuff is figured out. And that just doesn't work. And
right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So
So what's the alternative to that? What's the alternative to people sitting there going, "This is my end goal"? How do you partner with people to go about it slightly differently?
I say to the folks who want to work with me, this isn't a quick fix. It's a lifestyle. Just like before I got into this work, I was actually in the fitness industry, helping people with nutrition and exercise and physical rehabilitation. And if you know anything about eating well and taking care of your body, you don't just do it for a certain amount of time. You keep doing it, I hope, right? You eat well, you have to drink water, you exercise. And so we've treated the trauma process or the healing trauma process like it's an infection. My two examples are like a bacterial infection or a broken bone. Mm-hmm. If you have a bacterial infection, that's a problem and you want to get it figured out, whether you do it naturally or you take antibiotics. Let's say it's so bad, the system needs some antibiotics. That course of antibiotics has an endpoint, usually 12 days, 10 days, cleans out the nasty bacteria, and then you might replenish your gut, of course, with the foods you need to grow the bacteria back, but there's an endpoint. You break a bone, it hurts, you go to the orthopedic surgeon, they fix it, you cast it, it heals, it mends, it's done. Trauma and healing it and all the stuff that we're talking about, the conditions, the domestication, industrialization, not expressing ourselves, that isn't a one thing. Typically, I have yet to meet Miles. I have yet to meet. My husband did once. He does the same work as me. I think once he had a client that came and she had a car accident and she actually had a really solid upbringing, good parents, and she was still having a little bit of trouble with, I don't remember what it was, but it was a shock trauma that was cleaned up like the antibiotics, like put it in, we do the work, get rid of those memories, boom. I have yet to actually work with someone that's simple. Yeah. And so that is why for me, this is a lifestyle. I mean, I'm 46 this year. I had a fairly good upbringing. It wasn't perfect. I have other things that I dealt with. I had lots of shock traumas, but to this day, I'm still processing various intergenerational stuff. I'm still processing various things that I was exposed to that I knew I held in my body. Of course, I'm regulated and healthy, and this isn't to scare people because this can be a bit scary, but it's like we're at a point in time where we haven't birthed any generations that have been free of that kind of adversity that we've been talking about. Conditions, programs, not allowing children to express. So there's like this interesting situation where for a person to go into this work and go into it, dare I say, well, there needs to be, from what I've seen, an agreement that this is a lifestyle. And it doesn't mean that things aren't going to get miraculously better. They will. You know, people get regulated, their sleep improves, their gut improves, their relationships improve. And let's just say a student has all that happen. They work like heck to regulate their system. And let's just say, knock on wood, but let's say someone gets into a car accident, because that stuff happens. If they choose to not do the work to process that, that's not good. Their system can then fall back. And so as stressors new come in, as old memories come up, we have to constantly be working with this, or else the system's capacity then shrinks again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But what's sort of coming to me a little bit with what you're saying is that we're in this situation, like you say, we haven't birthed a world or a community or so on that's got this basis, of wholeness and resilience and not traumatizing everybody every day, because a good society would
At least in our,
we wouldn't be doing
in our
this.
civilized society.
Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
what we've got currently. So anything we come up with actually is just this kind of remedial work, you know, and it's, you're going to have to do it again tomorrow because there's still all this stuff coming at you. Whereas, you know, in this context that we're kind of trying to visualize or imagine, there would still be stuff happening, but it wouldn't be built into the system, you know, that most of the human beings you engage your life with are going to be manifesting stuff in your direction at some point, which are triggering, traumatizing, disappointing, abandoning, betraying, you know, that's or just dead and not responding or whatever, you know, all of this stuff's going to be coming at us just from everybody around us because we're all in the same boat. And then you couple that up with, well, it's more like the uncoupling factor of we don't have this engagedness with our surroundings. And it's just becoming more clear with your describing there that the work that you're doing is fundamentally about engaging with the body, but that has been disrupted so much that again, you know, your memories are going to keep coming up that trip you over again. You can't just get that out of you because, you know, so, you know, we're in this situation where it is constant. But what I was thinking, because this came up in one of the previous conversations, and I'm always wary when I accidentally stumble into using a mechanical metaphor for something, because you usually think, well, actually, if you look at that, you're going to see that there's a snare in that metaphor, and the idea of like reconnecting. We might stumble into thinking, okay, so there's this pipe that's broken, let's fix the pipe back together, or this wire has been broken, let's rewire. Whereas actually, it's not like that. It's weaving. It's a fabric with many fibers. On this side, sorry, my hand, this side, and then there's another side, you know, which is okay. It's perhaps me and my body. I need to reweave that fabric there, or it's me and my family, or the relationships, or it's me and the land, you know. And when you think about it like that, you think, okay, well, you know, there's wear and tear to a fabric, you know. So we're not going to just absolutely weave that, and it's never. No. You know, it's like your skin needs to be rewoven every day when you sleep with protein and so on. But I think, you know, what comes to me is that the way forward. This is something I'm working on at the moment, just in terms of pondering the metaphors. Is rootedness. You know, because that's the thing. You know, this stuff that's happening is above ground. The wind's blowing, the rain's hitting you, or someone comes and chops your limbs off, whatever, if you're a tree. You know, but the thing that's going to sustain you is the fact that those roots properly go down. And I just kind of, I hear in what you're saying that you're getting people's root system re-established, you know, that they're going down into their own.
100%.
Their own.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's this concept again of, well, let me start a different way. The somatic pieces, right, that I work with, a lot of the people that come into the work that I'm doing have done a lot of somatic work, a lot, like years, decades of yoga and healing work, and even therapy and Tai Chi and Qigong, and you name it. These people have tried everything because they've been unwell. And all of it has been contributing to their ability to stay alive and live. And some of them are still really sick, even with, you know, the cleanest diet ever, meditation. This is a very common thing that you'll hear when people have been struggling with chronic illness. They really are doing everything they can, and they don't understand why they're still not well. And these are people who are in their 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s, etc. But then when they get into this other way of working with the system, which is about not what am I doing to my body, or what can I do to fix this thing I'm feeling that I don't like, but rather than that, this capacity building and learning about the branches of this nervous system, they're really getting to go with what you said. They're getting to the root. They're getting to the root of why all those other things got messy in the first place. And that's where, you know, the autonomic nervous system is a peripheral nervous system, and it touches every organ, every vessel. It goes to the brain. It goes to our social engagement apparatus. It is involved with how we see the world or don't see it, right? It also is how, it's also a reason why human relationship is so difficult, because we've all been brought up differently for the most part. And so then you have two human beings who fall in love, you know, because there's a spark of energy, but they're from totally two different backgrounds. Morals are different, religion is different, how they see the world is different. And then they come together and there's this, you know, clash, this friction. I think there's a reason why a lot of, in a lot of countries, it's not so much here, at least in North America, but you don't marry outside of your religious group.
Makes a lot of sense.
Or in the United States, outside of your political, you know, outside of your political party, because then there's too much diversity in how do we deal with that, right? And then you have kids, and then of course how you deal with kids is different on different sides. And so then you have this confusing mess because people don't know how to work with that, because they're working with something that, to me at least personally, is more external. Whereas this root that you mentioned it isn't just the nervous system. And often people think, oh, well, how do you just work with the nervous system, Irene? I said, well, we're not in a roundabout way, and we are, because we're working with the systems that the nervous system connects to. Which
no,
is
exactly,
all of
because
it.
because if you're listening to your body, for example, the one of the things I'm most interested in, and I can't say I'm particularly far on the journey, but it's just that sense of what you should eat. You know, your body's saying, just stop and think, what do I fancy eating, rather than going to the automatic pilot of this is what I have for breakfast or whatever. Just stop, like what.
Exactly.
That's your nervous system, but it's your nervous system as the information. You know, it's your stomach telling you that. Your stomach isn't your nervous system. I know your stomach is connected to, but like the actual bit that's
connected to. Yeah.
Well, you know what I'm saying is, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah. No, you're 100%. Like our preferences are based on routine so often, and I know when I was studying nutrition, I remember a professor saying that the typical, again, this is North American diet, but I'm sure it's similar in Britain and in Australia and New Zealand, is most people eat about the same 6 to 7 foods every day. Just because that's the habit, that's what they know. If you go back to, say, culture, Mediterranean culture is often the example, they're eating close to 30 to 35 different foods a day.
Yeah.
When you bring in all the different variety. And of course, a lot of that has to do with the climate and where you live. But of course, now there's just food everywhere from every part of the world, which isn't necessarily good either. But, you know, there's just that, you're right. You wake up, this is what you eat. Lunch is this is what you always eat. And part of the thing I've seen a lot of students struggle with, but also find huge revelation in, is that they can actually choose to eat what they feel like eating. One student, so funny, she had restricted, because carbohydrates have been said to be bad, you know, like don't eat anything. Anyway, and I agree that to a certain degree, we need to obviously be balanced, but she had restricted anything that was bread or potato or pastry, any of that, like just such huge restriction.
Yeah, it's extreme.
Yeah, so extreme. And then she got into this work with me, and it was after the fact, and she was struggling with weight and wanting to lose some weight. And she went with her impulse miles, and all she did for about 3 weeks was bake scones and croissants and cakes and pies and toast. And she enjoyed it and she made it herself, and she lost a significant amount of body weight. And did that have to do with what she was eating? I don't think so. I think it was more the intention and following the impulse. And she even said, I know that I can't keep doing this because I need vitamin C and protein and all these other things. But she took a moment to kind of equalize the strong conditioning that I'm not supposed to eat this because I'm trying to lose weight. And, you know, fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, just to loop it back to how I took us off on that caveat about the food, it's just, you know, she's working with her nervous system, right? She's
100%.
So this is a very, you know, it's about cooking and eating and things like that. It's not in some kind of inner realms of inner experience or something freaky, you know. This is just very basic, but it's still the
going with that impulse. And then being smart to know, right? Again, this is where that higher brain, because if we're just compulsive, and some people are very compulsive, this is what drives addiction in one sense, we'll never stop to think, maybe I should, okay, this is enough, right? I need to switch. And so she had that higher brain observation mind that was watching this, enjoying it thoroughly, but also knowing that this isn't going to be my life for the rest of my life, because that's not healthy either.
I mean, I'm just really interested in how that higher brain thing is partnering with the subtle instinctive stuff, you know, because, you know, the addiction thing is basically a sabotage, isn't it? You know, like the signaling has got hijacked by chemicals or bad gut flora or you know, various different things. But I feel sure that, like, the super instinctive person, there's a way that the higher brain thing is meant to be partnering with that. I don't know.
Well, this goes back to you know, this concept of what's the potential for humans, right? Yeah. Where can we go? Like how evolved can we get? And I think what you just asked there about this distinction or this concept of this higher brain being connected, again, this comes back down to how we separate things all the time. You know, it's very reductionistic, very Cartesian, to break everything apart. And again, this is another misnomer with the work that I do, that Peter does, that Kathy does. People say, oh, well, all that somatic work, that's just bottom up. And all the psychology work is top down, meaning bottom up means you're feeling the body, and then that's informing the brain. And all the top down work, which is like the Freud and the Jungs and the psychology and the cognitive behavioral therapy, that's all working with the thoughts and then changing the system. And Peter will say, and I will say, that's not accurate. When we're working at the nervous system level, we have to bring in this higher brain. And I think that's where I have seen, at least, colleagues of mine and other forms of work lose some of the nuance of humanity, is that all they're caring about is the somatic release, the emotional release, the shaking to come out of the body. But they're failing, and I'll use that word because I've seen it as a failure in some of these methods, they're failing to teach the human slow enough to also watch how the thinking gets embedded in the body. Yeah. Because psychosomatic is a real thing. Like, a person can put themselves into a panic attack, which is physiological, by thinking about something that they don't want to do, or thinking about a past event. And so that shows us that our mind, as we know, can influence the body. And so if we're working with the body, we also have to understand that the mind, or I often like to say the thinking, it also will pop up because we can't separate it. And so that's, I think, to go back to that point that you said, is like, how does that higher brain come in? And we have to just acknowledge it and know that it's there. I will never, in any of my lessons or classes, say to my students, try to calm the mind or try to empty the thoughts. that is just a recipe for disaster, because our brain is meant to create thoughts and memories and images. And if an image comes up, and by image I mean, you know, seeing the color red, or a memory from the past, or whatever it is, if that spontaneously unfolds, to go back to that topic of unfolding, if it naturally blossoms out of the system, that's really important information for the human to take in and then track and follow, because it might lead us to an emotion that's been buried, or a memory that's been stored away, or that procedural memory that we didn't get to do when the soccer ball was coming to our head. But if we say to someone, okay, in this practice, you're just going to do this, and you're going to empty your mind, and you're just going to focus on your breath, we're too conditioned as humans, so this is again the higher brain thing, to follow instructions, right? School system did that to us. And so if we're following instructions like good little humans, when that natural impulse goes up, we will then create survival stress and a confusion, because some people will see that image or feel that thing, and they'll automatically go, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this. I shouldn't be seeing this. The teacher said I got to do this, do this, do this. And then they're into a somatic survival frenzy. Some people who have a little more space and are a little more maybe heretical will be like, okay, I'm in this meditation class, and all of a sudden I'm seeing this image. I'm just going to not listen to what the teacher's saying, and I'm going to follow this image and see where it goes. I tend to do that if I'm ever forced to do some kind of meditation at a conference, you know, where they'll get everybody to meditate and close their eyes. And sometimes I might be okay doing that, and other times it's like, screw you, I don't want to do this. My system doesn't want to do this. And I'm just going to go into my own little world and feel what I'm feeling. But not everybody has that agency to choose a situation that their system is offering them, or an opportunity that an opportunity that their system is offering them. So I think that's where this is a fine line between, I hope you're seeing that this work that I am in love with and I like and see has worked. It's so much more than just working with the somatic system. It's listening to and learning and relearning how transitions occur in our body, how the somatic experiences arise, how the brain interrelates with this, and then how we interrelate with the environment, with others, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we explore the root metaphor alongside what you've just been talking about there, like, so the polyvagal theory tackles the issue of it not being just bottom up and not just being top down, but there's a great sort of correction to our over heady orientation, you know, in the West, because Stephen Paul just tells us that 80% of the signaling is coming from down up to the brain, and only 20% is going down from the brain. So it's like the brain is in charge, but only because it's having to listen so much to what this 80% that's coming from the body. But I guess the point is that 80% is the roots, you know, and the root system. I've got some great pictures of various different plants, and you see how much that's underground and how much is above ground. Like a dandelion goes down about 4 feet. It's extraordinary, and just beautiful pictures like that. And you just think, okay, there's a lot more underneath. It's a bit like an iceberg, and there's a lot more under the water than there's above. And so that sort of corrective, but there still is a plant up here.
100%.
And this plant up here is doing all the stuff of reaching up to the sun. It's scattering out the pollen and attracting in the bees. So this essential stuff is happening, and food's going down into the roots. It's just that kind of correction. But we still are these extraordinary creatures that have this beautiful flower on the top,
100%.
You know, higher brain thing of what we can do. But the stuff that we can do coming from down beneath the surface, because, you know, that's what I kind of see. I mean, I just reminded myself of different practices where exactly what you're talking about happens. You know, what's his name? Dan Siegel's Wheel of Awareness. I kind of do that as often as I manage to stick to that. I find that really nice. And because at the one point where you're actually supposed to be going, you do your kind of breathing bit and you go, okay, what's going to pop up now? And you sit there waiting for the first thought, feeling, image, whatever, and you go with it. And I found that to be a tremendous exercise that usually ends up with me journaling what happened, because it's a sense and it leads me down something. And I feel that's come from beneath the surface. It's come from down there, up it's come, and now it's in my hard brain and I'm thinking it.
Yep, 100%. Well, our emotions originate in the viscera, in everything kind of neck down. The sensations breed emotion, and then we interpret them as anger, sadness, joy, fear, surprise, disgust, And so, like your example of the flower, the dandelion with the roots is perfect. And if I think of the human, so yes, there's this higher brain, that's like the thought flower at the top. But then the roots, it's the gut, but it's also, it's everything else. Because even when we're faced with a survival stress or a scary environment, it isn't just the gut that responds, it's the skin, it's the fascia, it's the fluid system.
Right. Yeah.
And again, that's where there's this, we're getting there, but it's the gut and everything else in the human system. And so what you said about the 80% going, the pathways going from the gut to the brain and 20 from the brain down is 100% accurate, as Porges has stated. And as we mentioned a little while ago, if we're not connected to that gut and we don't know how to feel it, we're going to that isn't a reality.
So you've got an idiot in control. You've got this guy up the top with 20% going down. He doesn't know what the hell's going on down there.
No,
He's
like, hello. And the gut is like, the gut has the potential, what you were saying earlier, the conditions, it needs the right conditions, the foundations to flourish and to talk. And it's so amazing when you start to even just do the tiniest bit of listening, it's like the system starts to cheer and it like lets off firecrackers, because it is more intelligent than the survival. Our brain has huge intelligence, but its intelligence, that organic unfolding, is just there. But then, of course, that brain's conditioning will also question, well, this is stupid. Why am I touching my gut? Why am I making this sound? Why am I connecting to my kidneys? This is stupid. The brain you'll have that tug of war. And then the person has to use their own free will and the higher brain to say, no. Yeah, I think I know you think this is stupid, and that's okay. And we want to do this. So we're working with all these conditioned responses as to what is appropriate, what we've been taught is possible. And not everyone will be able to do the work, because their belief systems will get in the way. I've seen that happen.
Yeah, it's tough.
Right. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, there's lots more we could and I'm sure we'd like to explore. I'm going to have to wind up. I'm sure but I, in a couple of minutes, I just wanted to tell you a story.
Yeah.
Because it's just it's so funny. As I say, we've been covering all this polyvagal stuff, but we had this super live example of the dorsal vagal shutdown thing played out in our garden last week. So I mentioned that we have guinea pigs, and my wife and I, we were woken up at midnight. Me first. She took a couple of minutes longer, so I was out there first, hearing this kind of when guinea pigs, they go week, and it was a racket, and I thought, what on earth is going on? It's midnight. They sometimes fight amongst themselves, and there's a bit of a fuss, but not like this. So I jumped out, got out as quick as I could.
Yeah.
And it's quite a little way to get down, so I'm hearing this sound the whole time. But anyway, I get outside, and we've got like this wire cage
Well, it's like a run, but it looks like a cage.
Yeah.
And I get out and look at them. There's 4 guinea pigs in there. And there is a huge adult badger. I don't know if you have badgers there, but this thing is, it's like nearly 3 foot long, and they're big and heavy. And a baby badger inside the cage. And I'm standing there thinking,
how did you get in there?
What the hell? And the badger's looking at me thinking, what the hell? And the poor guinea pigs are just, I see one of them running. I can't see the rest of them. One of them run. And this badger, the adult badger just dives at the edge and somehow gets out. It looked like an impossible thing. It just ran at the side and it was out. And the baby's in there freaking out. Well, I got down on my knees and realized that what the badger had done, obviously how it got in, there's a little gate that lifts up. And it stuck its nose under it, forced it up, and that's how it got out. Baby's sitting there. I opened the gate and the little baby comes out. By this time, Ali's come out. She's going, what's going on? What's going on? And we've got this baby badger running around. This is a bit extraneous to the actual point of the story, but I've got to tell you.
No, it's good.
Here's this little baby running around, yeah? Actually, it's not, because the baby's in fight or flight. Doesn't know what to do.
No.
And we stopped and did our best to kind of talk soothingly to this freaking out baby badger. We said, come on, baby, your mum went that way. It's that way. Come on, it's all right. And we tried to herd it and shepherd it. Sorry, you're not seeing any of my hand movements here.
No, I can see.
But anyway, we're trying to, and eventually we realized this baby's just not listening to us. We're not doing any good. Let's attend to the guinea pigs. And when we shut up and left it alone, I think it calmed down just a little bit. And caught the badger trail, because they leave a lot of scent, badgers. Caught its mum's trail, followed it through, and out it went. So that fight or flight thing had slightly dampened. It was able to just tap into listening to smell is the thing, and off it went. And so we look in, and then I'm absolutely horrified to see that my daughter's favorite guinea pig, because one of these guinea pigs has survived. It's been through this whole other episode I mentioned earlier. It survived, and the other ones ran out and got eaten. And then we bought more to keep her company. So the older one is just lying completely sprawled out on its back inside one of the hay things. I picked it up and it just completely flopped. And I said, Ali, I'm really sorry. Mims is dead. We have to try and figure out what's happening with the rest. And I'm fiddling around trying to see where they might be. But then I see this guinea pig's back leg goes like that. And I said, well, I don't know what's happening. Just one flick. So I said, well, I think it's just the nerves, it's dead, but it's that last little kick, like when you kill a chicken or something, it flaps its wings. That's what I thought it was. I said, but I don't know. And she said, well, let me have her. I said, well, there you go. And so Ali picks this guinea pig up and starts doing that and talking to her. And then she disappears. I said, look, I'm going to find the others. She says, I'm going to go inside. So I find the others. They were under the hutch and one inside the hutch. I got them all together in, and I carry this hutch inside with all 3 of the other ones. And I come back in, put it down, and Ali's kind of having a bit of a moment there with and I thought, well, she's just sad. And then a minute later, she said, she's alive. She's alive. I went, wow. So what we had there was full-blown shutdown, and she had claw marks on her back, right? So I think the badger got as far as pinning her down, and then she just went
shut down,
locked like that, and the badger left her alone.
Of course.
So that's that. I mean, you hear the stories about this, but it's the most dramatic example I've actually seen, because we were convinced she was dead. And she came back.
It's incredible, and that's the thing, is often when an animal goes into shutdown, the predator loses interest because the adrenaline to get it shifts, right? But that's it's an amazing feat, the system's protection, and think of that with the human system. We tend to not go into that level of shutdown. But the level of shutdown we do go into is also tempered with our higher brain. And that is so taxing, because we're not just shutting down, we're partially shutting down because we're still having to engage.
And then we have to witness ourselves not being able to do stuff, basically.
Exactly. And then if you have a child that's in an environment where every day they're having to temper who they are and shut down, or they are shut down, I mean, this is where you get into the problems. And so again, back to the whole higher brain animal that we are, this is where we get into trouble. And so that understanding those responses are really important, because a lot of the healing that happens when people are working as adults is they realize that the shutdown that they went into, or the partial shutdown, was not functional necessarily, but it was adaptive so that they could survive.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's just one last thing I wanted to, I mean, this is dangerous because this could open up another hour, but like
what we've been talking about in terms of this getting in touch with your body and realizing that this is the nervous system going out to the periphery and talking to the higher brain and so on. See, the thing is, the emphasis with polyvagal theory is very much on that shutdown thing in relation to the dorsal thing. That's the main thing that's communicated, that this dorsal vagus is there to deal with absolute life threat, and it will do this. You know, Stephen does acknowledge that actually when we're able to immobilize without fear and embrace someone else and be just still and calm, that is also dorsal. But I did a chat with Holly Bridges, who's done a lot on autism around polyvagal theory, and she planted the seed in my brain that actually we're missing something, or we're missing maybe a great deal, like with the dorsal vagus, that actually, and we came up with just talking about this roots metaphor, that maybe that's it, you know, that the dorsal vagus is a whole depth of experience, real kind of depth, that actually the social engagement thing is much more about the surface. It's much more about our connection with things in quite a light and bright and breezy way, which is amazing. And personally, I need a great deal more of that. Wish I'd had a lot more of it in my childhood and the rest of my life, in fact. So I'm really 3 cheers for the polyvagal theory, making me more conscious of this social engagement thing. But I just feel that a lot of what you're talking about with people getting in touch with their body and so on, is they're actually listening to that dorsal vagus, actually.
Well, the important thing to know too with the dorsal is that there's 2 tones that the dorsal works in. Are you familiar with that?
No.
So there's the high tone dorsal of the parasympathetic.
Yeah.
And I liken it to kind of a standard transmission of a car. You know, you've got the same engine, but then you have gear 1, 2, 3, depending on how fast or slow you're going. The dorsal branch of the vagus nerve, which is the parasympathetic nervous system, has 2 functions. One is that deep shutdown, right? The deep shutdown. There's the dorsal, and then there's the ventral, which is the social engagement, which also goes to the heart. So it's going deeper than just what we think of as social. But then the dorsal has a high tone and a low tone. And the high tone is what your guinea pig went into, you know, like, I'm going to die. Let's go into preservation mode. All the blood goes to the core, shut down, low blood pressure, low oxygen, prepare me to die.
I mean, she was cold. That was the extraordinary thing. Yeah.
Everything just, because it's a near-death experience. And then, of course, there's levels of high-tone dorsal, you know, someone that's in shock after an accident, a human, for instance, that isn't shutting down, but is still going slow. But then there's this other branch, or this other, we call it tone of the dorsal, which is called the low tone of the dorsal branch of the parasympathetic. And that is the true rest digest. That's the true rest digest. So, you know, we're getting better with the language, but when you hear people in popular press talk about the parasympathetic and they say that's the rest digest, it's like, well, that's not 100% accurate, because there's also the high tone dorsal, there's the ventral, but then the low tone is where we want to live most of the time. that's where we want to go when we're sleeping to repair. That's where we want to be when we're hanging out and watching a funny show, when we're reading a book, when we're listening to some gentle music. That allows our system that allows the immune system to repair, the cells to repair, and the gut lining to repair at night. And so what you're saying, I think you're having an intuition on something that's accurate, and that the dorsal, that tone, is where the healing is. It's also in the social.
Yeah.
But for the most part, as mammals, so this goes back to our animal nature, we need a lot of oxygen and a lot of blood, because our brain needs a lot of sugar, right, to work, glucose. And so when we're doing our healing movements and lessons and more slower, meditative, contemplative, like what you said with Dan Siegel's work, or anything that's bringing us into this kind of gear one or neutral, even, it's allowing the system to really listen. And that's where that's where your tummy starts to gurgle. You know, you have a meal, you sit down on the couch with a cup of tea or a digestif or whatever it is that you do, and you start to feel the gurgling. And that is the sign that the low tone dorsal is happening. Someone who lives in high level stress, sympathetic, or high tone dorsal, shutdown, they cycle between shutdown and sympathetic. After that meal, their gut is not going into that low tone. They'll digest, but it won't be as well as it can be. So that is very rarely talked about, this high tone dorsal. It comes from, it's what I've learned through Kathy Kane. It comes from the gastroenterology studies that study the gut and how the gut repairs. And it's literally called, when we are repairing in this low tone dorsal way, it's called barrier keeping of the gut. So it's stitching. You mentioned the skin stitching up. Gut's the same. It stitches up at night. So there's a barrier so that proper nutrients can be absorbed. And when we don't have that stitching, that's where leaky gut comes in.
Yeah.
The holes are getting bigger, and then that's where things go bad, to keep it simple. So yes, the dorsal is super important.
Yeah.
Super important.
I got all excited about the social engagement theory with this Porges thing, and I still totally am. But to realize
they all work in connection, right?
Yeah.
It's like you can't, and I think that's where we get into trouble when we start breaking it down. The theorists break it down, but then the clinicians and the people who are in the field have to put it back together again. Right? Because you're right, that idea of fear, immobility without fear, that's what allows a mother to breastfeed her child. You have to go still. You have to go into that, right? But before that occurs, there is a social engagement. You have to tune, baby's hungry. And then you go into that immobility response, but without fear. But then the gear is waiting to listen when baby stops latching and doesn't want any more food, and then hello, and then right. And so it's just this fine tuning that when we can look at the polyvagal work in that way, it becomes fun, as opposed to da 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 da.
Yeah, no, the subtleties of it, like we're a little bit social, we're a little bit dorsal, but I mean, what it's brought home to me, and this is well, anyway, what it's brought home to me is the idea that the social engagement thing could actually be a little bit shit, actually, because if you look at what superficiality is, there's lots of smiling and nodding and all the right things being said, and to a certain extent, people are in social engagement mode, but if there's not this underlying dorsal thing happening, it is basically shallow as shit. So. And people are maintaining a world of sugar-coated superficiality in that, and the sugar coating is the social engagement. It's the sweetness of this shallow interaction.
You know, so that kind of brought it home to me. So, because I mean, basically, just confession here. Like I do sort of see a deficit in my skills to sometimes be cheerful and make small chat and things like that. And I thought, okay, so I need to become more socially engaged, and that's been a good journey, you know, to realize that my kids will actually respond to me a lot better if I make eye contact when they talk to me and like that. Do you know what I mean? Just that all of the really important and very obvious things about how life works much better when you work with that system rather than just being not in that system. But I'm now with this insight just seeing, well, actually there is something about people that who are constantly able to switch that on, but don't go any deeper, which is not necessarily 100% a positive thing. So
yeah. Well, and what you said there, there's a misnomer too with the social engagement portion, because people think that means you have to be social with another human being, and that's not accurate.
Right. Yeah.
In other words, you can spark up your social engagement. I mean, we do it all the time, but we haven't labeled it. Listening to music, reading a book, working with art, engaging with the tree that I see out there, orienting to nature, that's sparking up the social engagement system. So in some ways, we could technically say, Miles, that the social word is not the best word to use for that branch. It's really, the branch is called the ventral vagal portion of the parasympathetic.
Yeah.
And it's only called that because it goes in front of the brainstem when it comes out of the brain. It's ventral, it's forward. But what that nerve does, it sparks us to our environment. It sparks us to our surroundings, our sensations, hearing, our voice. You know, singing in the shower is sparking up the social engagement nervous system. You don't have to do it with a person. So it's not, I think you're on to something, because the people that I work with who have had horrific trauma from their environment due to abuse in their family system, they're petrified to be with other humans. Even if they know damn well the human is safe, it's not, because their cellular system sees everything in the world as dangerous and everyone's going to hurt me. And so kind of old therapy would be like, well, to heal that, you got to go to the club, or you've got to go to a group meeting, or you got to find a friend or whatever. And I say, if you're overriding your comfort and your safety to force social engagement, you're not doing anybody any favors. How can you engage the ventral vagal portion at home? I mean, that's where the plant example came in that we talked about. It's like, I'm socially engaging with my ferns in my house. And that's not crazy. That's a way of engaging. I'm engaging with a book where I'm reading fiction and I'm imagining it, you know.
Also though, when you attend to yourself, you know, I mean, there's this thing which I still kind of trip over on more times than not with the Dan Siegel Wheel of Awareness thing, where he goes, okay, now you're going to attend to yourself attending.
Right.
You're going to be aware of your, and it's a bit like a drawing that a friend of mine at school did. He was quite a cunning artist.
Yeah.
And he drew a picture of somebody taking their eyeball out and looking at the other eyeball.
Sure.
And I always think of that. I think, this is ridiculous. How can I attend to me attending to that? But that is what we're doing. We are being social towards ourselves. We are listening to ourselves as if we were another. And that's an act of kindness and sociality, you know.
And that is the human brain. So, you know, to go back to how our uniqueness, how we are diversified from the mammal, at least as far as I know, and maybe some primatologists or Jane Goodall could debate this with me, but us as humans, we have got capacity to bring into our awareness not only the present moment, and this is what I dabble with my students, the present moment and all living color, sensation, vision, auditory, kinesthetic, but then we can also interlay the past, memories, and also the future. And I've worked with this with my students. When we can start to bring more dimensions to our awareness that aren't just in the current moment, we start to go into what we would call, it's like a super trance state, where you're not losing connection with self, but you're losing connection with what you perceive to be true in the reality. And that's where it gets fun. People will say, all of a sudden, I feel like I'm this organism that isn't just here. And I think that's fun, because that shows how it's more than the social engagement system when you're playing with that. It's a part, I think, that we actually haven't, at least as far as I know, really studied it. It's hard to study that level of awareness, because it's not one thing. It's not even 100 things. It's infinite things that we're paying attention to. So I forget why I went on that tangent, but
Yeah.
oh yeah, the Dan Siegel thing, the eye.
Looking at yourself, yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, it is far out when you slip into actually doing it rather than thinking, this is ridiculous. How can I think about me thinking about it? when sometimes you just drop into it and you think, wow.
You gotta drop.
Wow.
If you do it cognitively, it won't work. And that's why a lot of folks struggle with these sorts of meditations, is they haven't done the groundwork to know how to be with all of their sensory experience. If they haven't built, again, back to that capacity, the capacity to be with everything that's coming up, a sitting practice will feel like hell, because all they're focused on is what this is producing. And it's terrifying for some people. And a lot of people then think they're broken because I can't meditate, because that's what people say I should do, because that's healthy for the da-da-da-da-da. But what's being left out is the history of survival stress, the history of disconnection with the body. And we have to kind of look at things from a different perspective, because we're not all monks living on the top of a mountain in Bhutan. You know, we've got different complexities, and we've all been raised differently, to go back to the animal example. And so with that, this is where I'm not a big advocate of like specific steps, specific methods that tell you do this first and this first and this first. You get into trouble when you haven't done enough groundwork with a person, because you have no clue where their system is going to turn when you start to feel the gut, for example.
Yeah, you're opening a door, but it's not going to, for different people, the other side of that door is potentially going to be very different. Yeah.
The other thing that you said that I want to address was that the social engagement thing, where you're like, I just don't want to be polite. I don't want to be that person that's making small talk. You mentioned that a second ago.
Yeah.
That comes back to our programming and our conditioning. You know, we've been taught to be polite, to not rock the boat, to the things
I should qualify that and to say, in my family, I was taught to be rude and rock the boat. So.
Oh, good. Okay, so or there's that. You know, there's two sides to it, but you know, again, we were told certain things, whether it was that or this, and it's sort of, this comes back to personal power and agency, and a human being making the decision to create their own world, as opposed to engaging with the world based on the personality that they had to develop to survive in the family system.
Yeah.
Right. So if you were encouraged to rock the boat and all that, and let's just say that maybe your true nature wasn't that. Maybe it was a bit of that, but a little bit more of this. But that wiring is like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do, so I better follow that, because that's what I needed to do to stay in the family system. And this is where people become really confused.
I mean, it's more a case of modeling in this case. I don't think anybody actively encouraged me to rock the boat or be rude, but it just that's what was modeled by my kind of fairly in your face behavior of my parents. Yeah.
Got it. So I think that's an important distinction, is people will have like what we could consider an existential midlife crisis when they do drop in finally and they go, whoa, this isn't me. Where did I learn this? This isn't how I want to be. Bruce Lipton, actually, I don't know if you know his work. He is actually the man that did the cell research that proved that epigenetics is a real thing.
Okay. Yeah.
He's in his 70s, an American scientist, and The Biology of Belief, I think, is the book that really got popular for him.
Yeah, I think I might have come across him actually. Name actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's a powerhouse of a talker, and he, you know, has said, you know, he actually, and I'll share an interview I watched of him. I think you'll really enjoy it. But his eloquence of talking about what humans could be, how we could be living if we focused on our creativity, our joy, our engagement with nature. It could be very different, but we've been told, we've been programmed into a lot of suffering, a lot of survival, a lot of slavery for many cultures. And it's wired, and some think it's 100% hardwired, but he was the one that showed, no. It's wired, but it doesn't have to be hardwired. But it will stay hardwired if you do nothing to shift the narrative of how you see and believe the world. And that's where I think his work is beautiful, because it's shown that things can change. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of those scientists keep going, is they know from their lab work and all of that, and I've seen it, that people really can change, but they have to want to make that shift.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah, you just start dealing with some of those barriers, whether we're calling that trauma or I don't know, habits even, you know, but allow some actual vital contact to occur, and it's that coupling between ourselves and something else, even if the something else is our own body, you know. But it seems to me that once we just get that touching to happen again, this magic is unstoppable. Actually, it's because it's there. That's how the system works. That's how the natural system works. You know. So that makes me very hopeful. You know, in spite of the fact you are obviously going on very long and difficult journeys with some of the people you're working with, and encouraging them to that it's not a quick fix, etc., etc., etc. But like the life does kick in. You know, when we manage to just clear away enough of the debris to get that touch to happen. You know. So it makes me very hopeful to hear about these things. And
I'm very hopeful with it, you know, and does that mean that I'm always happy and positive? No, things still trigger and get to me. And I look at things from a macro, and I look at, you know, my parents and probably your parents weren't sitting on a podcast call for 2.5 hours talking about the human brain and the nervous system and healing. They didn't have the luxury of that in their era, and this technology wasn't here. So there is an expansion right now occurring in humanity that's really good for us. And we also have to be cautious of how ingrained our survival mechanisms are, that will want to keep bringing us back to what we've known. And it's almost like we're trying to turn things 180 degrees to say, no, this could be really good. I know we haven't seen it before, but we need to find a way to create the new thing that we haven't seen yet. So I'm hopeful it'll happen. I think the missing piece has been the nervous system work. That's why I do it. I think it does hold the roots, but we also have to work with this central nervous system here, the brain, that is also equally powerful.
Yeah. Well, that's all good stuff, Irene. And we'll carry on the journey.
We will.
So thank you for joining us for this week's WorldWild Podcast. And for those of you that have been with us for the last 4 weeks, I guess it's been quite a long journey, and hopefully you've got some new insights or a completely new perspective if this subject is new to you. As ever, we encourage you to go to the Forager podcast homepage, www.forager.org.uk/podcast. You'll see links to some of Irene's work and some of the articles that she mentioned. So now it just remains to do our plant for this week. And it's sort of building on what I said in the introduction. So what I want you to look out for is mallow. Mallow is a plant that's in flower at the moment. It has a beautiful pink flower with 5 petals, and it's quite a deep notch on each petal, and darker purple stripes down each petal as well. So that's what should help you to spot it and home in on your local mallow patches. The leaves are what's known as palmate, so like the shape of a hand. They're basically circular, but with these little lobes sticking up, and a kind of purple dot in the center. Mallow leaves are used all across the Middle East. They're kind of used like we do spinach in the UK and elsewhere. But they have a sort of mucilaginous thing going on, a bit like okra. They're in the same family as okra, and actually the same family as henna, by the way. And if you think about it, the name marshmallow should give you a hint. So the original marshmallows were not made from sugar and gelatin as they are now, but they were made from boiling up the roots of another species of mallow. So the one I'm talking about is common mallow, but marshmallow that grows next to the coast, those roots were boiled, and it gave a sort of gloopy or mucilaginous substance, which was then sweetened with sugar and flavored with other things. And there's a whole process. But that process could be applied to the liquid that comes out of mallow when you cook it. So you could do yourself some green marshmallows if you look up those old recipes. Okay, so that's a plant for you to look out for. And that's it for this week's WorldWild Podcast.